I'm going to call the committee of the whole meeting to order and acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. Notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. And notice to virtual attendees to sign up for public comment and question period using the Q&A function in Zoom. The registered participants are required to enter their full name, residential address, and the agenda item they wish to speak to. I'll move from the chair that pursuant to section 11.1 of District of Tofino Meeting Procedures Bylaw number 1229/2016, the temporary facility provided for the public to watch and hear the December 16th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting is to be held in the multi-purpose room at the Community Hall located at 351 Arnott Road in Tofino, BC, and that the meeting is to be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted via the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. Seeing no objections, that recommendation is approved. I move from the chair that the December 16th, 2024 Committee of the Whole agenda be adopted. Seeing no objections, the agenda is adopted. I move from the chair that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held November 18th, 2024 be adopted. Seeing no objections, adopted. Move from the chair that the minutes of the Special Committee of the Whole meeting held November 28th, 2024 be adopted. Again, seeing no objections, they're adopted. Public comment on agenda items.
Thank you, Chair McMaster. I will now make an open call for comments to both members of the public present in the gallery and those participating online. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. If there is anyone attending online via Zoom that would like to make a comment, you can do so now using the Q&A function. Before making a comment, you will need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you are speaking to. I will now do a call calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times. No comments, Chair McMaster.
Okay, moving on to delegations. First delegation is from the Vancouver Island North Film Commission regarding in-film District of Tofino film policy. This is a PowerPoint presentation by Brendan Lapine.
If I may, Chair McMaster, we're unable to reach Brendan at this moment, so if you will allow, we could switch items 6.1 and 6.2 and allow Wildsafe BC Pacific Rim to first.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We'll move on to item 6.2. Wildsafe BC Pacific Rim regarding human and wildlife conflict overview. The path ahead. Bob Hanson. Welcome, Bob. You've done this before, and I know, so you've got 10 minutes max.
Wait, point.
Not at me.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to present on the activities of the Wildsafe BC Pacific Rim program for 2024. On phone, joining us is my colleague, Caitlin Baudin. And Caitlin tried Zoom, but it unfortunately didn't work. But she is on the phone call in and will be available at the end to answer any questions directly. I'll make mention that Caitlin is your new full-time year-round community coordinator. And that's quite an accomplishment for District of Tofino and the region, in that Caitlin is the first ever full-time year-round community coordinator in British Columbia. Thanks to this region and the district for your support that made this happen. My name is Bob Hanson. This is my 7th season with Wildsafe BC and my final season as I'm retiring. This is my last official function. I'll move on to the presentation. Oops, it's the laser.
You might. Oh, I do the turn on the side. On here. Last two. Thanks, Alan. Yeah. Okay, we'll
Okay. So, this will be a brief season overview for 2024. And during the presentation, you'll get some idea of the range and scope of challenges we've experienced coexisting with wildlife in the region this year. And also the range and scope of actions taken to coexist with wildlife and prevent conflict. I'll also, at the end of the presentation, speak to the roadmap ahead for coexisting in the longer term. Okay. So a little bit briefly about Wild Safety BC. It's managed by the BC Conservation Foundation. There are community coordinators, 30 or so, like myself and Caitlin, serving 100+ communities across BC. It is a registered registered charity nonprofit organization, and it's the provincial leader in preventing human-wildlife conflict with a focus and mission of keeping wildlife wild and our communities safe. So I'm going to start off with talking about the numbers of wildlife reports we received this season. And these numbers are still going up every single day. So we presented to the West Coast Committee on December 4th, and since that time we've had 26 more bear reports, 2 more wolf reports, and 3 more cougar reports. So we coexist with quite an abundance of wildlife, as we all know. Those reports come in from various sources. The largest source is from the BC Conservation Officer Service RAP line. But also another major source of reports is through social media. And the last bubble on the bottom there are reports directly made to us by phone or email or in the grocery store. The graphic on the right shows how we work in an overlapping fashion in close collaboration with the community, like bylaw services, and with Conservation Officer Service. And this has been a very strong working relationship over all the years the program's existed. So we're now up to 470 reports, 71 just before I came to the meeting in the region. I sent out a document as a backgrounder for this delegation. So I won't go into a lot of detail because there is quite a bit of detail in that backgrounder. And it describes how our reality has really shifted with the introduction of the residential cart system. Every year we would experience conflicts where bears were accessing a whole host of different types of unsecured attractants. Now, bears in the region, in our communities, have really focused their attention on the new residential carts. So as of this afternoon, we've had 24 carts dragged away, 121 repairs of the brass carabiners on residential carts, and 181 carts accessed by bears. 55 organics, 87 trash, and 39 recycling. And this is what it looks like when a bear is taking away a cart that hasn't been anchored. And what happens when they drag them away into a place, a private place where they can really spend time to work on them, is that they learn where the vulnerability is in the design of the cart. And you end up with these numbers that we see. The most recent development is bears that have progressed beyond breaking the brass carabiners to actually breaking the lids. So the education around how to prevent all of this from happening began the year before the carts were actually delivered into the communities. So there's been a coordinated, extensive education campaign around how to manage these carts at residences in a way that really reduce the risks of bears taking advantage of the carts. And so there's been partnerships with WildSafe BC, the regional district, the nations, the districts, Surfrider, and others to provide that education. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that about 80% of the carts in the region, that's conservative, it could be higher, are not secured properly. And so we see situations like this. So coming up is a slide of the number of food conditioned bears. And the food conditioned bears have all dragged carts into the bush, spent a whole bunch of time, really worked over the carts, and all of them independently discovered that if you just torque that brass carabiner sideways, it breaks the spring inside. Carabiner falls open and it's no longer a functional carabiner, and then they can just flip the lids open. So that is one major aspect of the picture. Another aspect of the picture in terms of accessing unnatural attractants is that we still see commercial receptacles in the region that are not secured. And so this year we had 26 instances where bears accessed commercial bins that weren't properly secured. And here's the overview of food conditioned bears. 3 in Tofino.
You got 1 minute left, Bob.
Okay. 3 in Tofino, 5 in Euclid, 1 in Millstream, 1 in Port Albion, 2 in Atatsu, and 1 in the Junction. So 13. And that's the behavior of a food conditioned bear in downtown Euclid. And these are the kinds of conflicts that we've experienced in the past and are familiar with. So these numbers are much lower than they have been in past years. And as a result of conflicts, we see a lot of close interactions between people and bears. The end, sort of one of the net results is bears trapped and translocated, one put down, and 1 died in a vehicle accident. And then there's wolf reports, very busy year for wolves. And you can go over through these numbers, but it shows the scope and the extent.
And your time's up. I'm gonna have to cut you off, Bob.
No worries.
We have a big agenda tonight, so.
Yeah, you bet.
Any quick questions? Can we make them quick?
It's just a comment and it will be quick. Just wanted to say thanks, Bob, for all your time coming before council, and it was a pleasure meeting you when I was 8 years old in Green Point with my family. Way back then, seeing you chasing a bear, so not a lot has changed. Yeah.
Okay, moving back
I have a
to.
question.
You have a question?
I do have a comment.
Hand up.
I did.
Get over your head.
That's okay, Bob. I understand that part of the delegation was a request for funding for annual funding, and I think the idea was to refer that to staff for the 2025 financial planning process. I'm just going to look to staff to see if they need a recommendation. Okay, well then I would like to move that we refer the request for $18,000, I believe it is, or $20,000? $20,000 to the 2025 financial planning process.
All those in favor? None opposed, motion carried. I was hoping by cutting them off, we could avoid the request for funding.
One more thing, Councillor Sloman has to.
Welcome, Councillor Sloman. Is the film board ready?
Yes, Mr. Lapine is standing by.
Okay, we're going to move back to 6.1, the Vancouver Island North Film Commission regarding in-film District of Tofino film policy. And we have a presentation by Brandon Lapine. Welcome, Brandon, and you have 10 minutes, and we're fairly strict on this tonight because we have a very big agenda.
Terrific. Thank you so very much. I will be quick. Good afternoon, Mr. Law, directors, and staff. My name is Brandon Lapine. I am the Regional Production Services Manager representing the Vancouver Island North Film Commission, and we've been asked to present before the board in support of the motion to update the film policy for the district. We are very pleased to have this opportunity to provide a little history of in-film and what we are doing to support bringing more film to the district specifically and the island in general. The Vancouver Island North Film Commission, in-film, is a not-for-profit and industry-certified organization that was formed in 2001. In British Columbia, a regional film commission is a specialized screen sector organization that is formally endorsed by both the province and the regional governments it represents. Our main area runs from Ladysmith North to Cape Scott, includes portion of the mainland coast. We are funded by the province of BC and 6 regional districts. In-film provides a free comprehensive support of the film, television, and media industry. In-film activities include marketing the region, first point of contact, facilitation of production from prep to wrap, location scouting and surveys, skills training, and equipment and fixer support. In-film also tracks and reports all film productions in the service area to the BC Provincial Film Commission. In 2023, In-film had leveraged a provincial grant.
You're muted.
Oh, did I? My apologies. Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me?
Can we just request a 2-minute recess because the mics were crackling? We may have an issue with audio, so we'll just take a 2-minute recess, Brandon, and we'll get back to you in a second here.
Okay, good. I didn't break this time.
Oh,
You're back.
oh, back.
I could hear him perfectly, just so you know.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, carry on, Brandon.
Okay. The Vancouver Island North, in 2023, In-film had leveraged a provincial grant that allows us to contract 2 location photographers from the Alberni Tla-o-qui-aht Regional District to update and capture new location files for the region. These location files are the #1 way to attract productions to the region. To date, there have been over 50 new or updated files for the district alone. Attracting and facilitating production. In pursuit of attracting productions to the District of Tofino and Vancouver Island, In-film has attended local, national, and international conferences and film festivals to meet with industry leaders and promote Vancouver Island as a filming destination. To date, In-film has over 2,900 files in our database, with over 900 new and updated location files in the last year. In addition to our scouting and drone work, we maintain and update our website, infilm.ca, and social media channels daily, sharing job offers, funding opportunities, filming production updates and promotion, industry updates, as well as promoting local producers and production houses. Regarding green industry and sustainability, green technology and environmental sustainability have been and continue to be drivers for the innovation in the film industry when filming on location, and especially in environmentally sensitive areas like many of the locations on the west coast of Vancouver Island. All In-film staff are Real Green certified by the province, and In-film has recently made a $100,000 investment in ordering 4 5-kilowatt volt stack rechargeable battery units. with the intent that these units be made available for productions when filming on Vancouver Island free of cost. These volt stacks will not only augment, but sometimes completely replace diesel generators on film sets, allowing productions to offset up to 20 kilograms of carbon dioxide that a diesel generator ordinarily would create during an 8-hour runtime. Green innovations and sustainability will and have already become a large part of where and why productions choose to film the regions that they film in. Permitting an economic impact tracking. That the District of Tofino is talking about updating the film policy is very well timed, as several other communities on the island are looking to do the very same thing. These communities are also looking to better track the economic benefits of having film production in their municipalities. As well as for economic reasons, many communities are looking to update their policies in response to an increase in film production and production inquiries in the last year, to give them more tools in the toolbox to better respond to the needs of production and the community during filming. Updating film policies will also allow communities and end film to better assess which locations are attracting filming and to allow better management and potential development of these areas. Most importantly, these communities are looking to update their film policies simply to better position themselves to attract and facilitate more film production and to be more competitive on the global market. In conclusion, the film industry is very well tailored for Vancouver Island, the West Coast, and tourism in general. It is an industry that will help us maintain the beauty of our island while allowing us to see the economic benefits for ourselves and our children. Film productions show up, they create jobs, they generate revenue, and then they leave the location as good, if not better, than when it got there. In 6 months to a year, you can see your little piece of the world on the screen, and with any sort of luck, 6 months after that, hopefully the tourists will start to arrive to visit locations where their favorite shows were filmed. I'd like to thank the board for their time and allowing me to speak and open the floor for any questions at this time.
Thank you, Brandon, for the brevity of that presentation. So I'll open it up. Any questions for Brandon? No questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you.
Moving on, I take it there's no correspondence. Okay, presentations and reports, 8.1, Janice Law, Tofino Pope Laureate, an invited presentation. Did you pay to get 15 minutes?
I think we paid her.
Better get the stopwatch out here. I can crack into it. Mayor and council, district staff, guests. Thank you for the opportunity to address you at this dark time of year, at this time of introspection and endings, when we turn our attention toward our wishes for peace and joy in the world, toward hope for new beginnings, toward light. I have now been on the job as Poet Laureate for 8 months, and I must say that I have been having a good time. I have been working toward my vision of promoting community and celebrating the arts and the artists who live here. I thought I would like to give you a brief rundown of what I've been up to. It has been a great challenge to write poetry on demand. I've had to navigate the complexities of my personal situation as a close neighbor of Headwaters to write a poem to celebrate its opening. And I have had the opportunity to wax poetic about a sewage treatment plant. I have been reaching out with excitement and curiosity to connect with the writers in our community and offer support. One initiative was a Poet Laureate sponsored book table at the summer and winter markets. Over 5 markets, we sold over $1,300 worth of books by local authors. Books of poetry, science, memoir, history, fiction, children's literature. I met many people, visitors and residents, and some of the younger writers in the community who stopped by to browse and exclaim over the number of books written by local authors. We had over 45 books representing 15 authors, and that doesn't account for all the work by writers in Tofino. At the end of August, the Friends of Tla-o-qui-aht Sound and the Poet Laureate co-hosted Harold Renish, an esteemed poet from Vernon. This fall, I began to host a series of night writes, inviting local writers to gather and spend an evening writing together at the Commonwealth. The final 2024 night write will be held December 30th, and you are invited to participate. Bring your own writing project or respond to the prompts given by the facilitator, and that would be me. There is an area in Tofino that local writers refer to as the writer's block. It runs roughly from the school to the hospital and from Campbell to just beyond Arnett. At any particular time over the years, this area has been home to 6 or 7 local writers. And of course, writer's block is a play on the affliction which writers dread when you sit down at the writing desk and are totally without inspiration. So on December 2nd, the Tla-o-qui-aht Writers Group and the Poet Laureate hosted a writer's block party at the Commonwealth, which just happens to be located within the writer's block. We invited local writers to come and get to know each other and play some writerly games. And if you're curious what these games might be, I invite you to attend the next one. Looking forward to 2025, I will be making handmade books at one of the weekly senior socials and leading a performance workshop with the high school creative writing club. I've begun soliciting poems about public art in Tofino and hope to produce a book by which visitors and locals can tour the public art in Tofino through poetry. And I'm beginning to plan a series of poetry events for April 2025, which is National Poetry Month. I'd like to thank the District of Tofino for providing this opportunity for me to contribute to the richness of our lives here through poetry, and for the ongoing financial support and supportive staff, particularly Karen Habib. I would also like to acknowledge the support and encouragement of the Tofino Arts Council, Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust, and Tourism Tofino. On December 19th, which is this Thursday, the Tla-o-qui-aht Writers Group and the Tofino Poet Laureate are hosting what is one of my favorite poetry events, the Community Poetry Night. We invite the community to bring a poem to share, either their own or someone else's, or just come and enjoy the warmth and magic of an evening of poetry. And I'd like to invite you all to attend this remarkable event. This year, I asked members of the community to share their poetic thoughts about the moody, stormy month of November for a community poem titled In Your Deepest November. I received 18 submissions, and many of the authors will be taking part in a reading of the poem on Thursday night. I thought I would begin my reading this afternoon with a teaser, a few stanzas from my own deepest November. In your deepest November, light trickles away through the darkening hourglass, the grit of a failing day on the cold floor beneath your feet. You realize you have to give in to the rain. In your deepest November, you curl yourself into the Afghan your mother made, the warm and loving touch of someone gone. Feel its weight as if it were her own arms around your body. What we may be, cloaked by the coming of winter. The secret nature of things inscribed on the lintel of your darkened house, unreadable in your deepest November. On the other side of your deepest November are those spectacularly beautiful, clear, cold days we are sometimes blessed with this time of year. And that's what this next poem is about. Approaching solstice. Outside the window, the white rime of morning melts slowly into day. The white rime of morning melts slowly into day. Everywhere the soft song of winter, the flicker of small wrens among bearberry and rose hips, the crack of ice in puddles. The wide blue eye of the sky, unblinking, brilliant above the winter green forest. Roads are lined with the purple froth of alders, the purple froth of alders. The long light shadowed and too brief. Tomorrow storms may spin, tossed from a gray and restless sea, but today my deck is floored with ice whorls and the streets scattered with frosted gems. I don't even think about spring. Poets don't often get a chance to talk about their poems with their audiences. So I thought I would take this opportunity to say a few things about these next poems. You may have had acupuncture at some time in your life. In Chinese medicine, there are something called internal pernicious influences. Don't you just love that? Which have the names of atmospheric conditions like wind, cold, heat, dry, and damp. And these are metaphoric representations of bad weather that persists in the human terrain. What's not for poets to like about Chinese medicine when it speaks in metaphors? So practitioners of Chinese medicine identify these conditions by reading the various pulses of the body. I grew up on a farm just north of Calgary and spent my childhood watching the sky for rain. When I moved out here to the wet coast, I thought, mistakenly, that my days of anxiety about drought were over. So this poem was written after one of our West Coast summers of drought. Dreaming of rain. The summer gone, scuttling before the wind like alder leaves, stripped away too early by drought. At least it will rain now. At least it will rain, and we will soak it in, wicking through sweaters and fleece, seeping slowly through oilskin, running in rivulets under yellow slickers. The air will grow pungent with mold and mildew, wet wool and rubber, feet living in gumboots. Winter will rise slick in my blood. Damp, my acupuncturist will declare, her fingers on my pulses, reading their deep dreams of rain. The final poem that I would like to share with you is a personal one. It's a poem about my birthday, which is today, and about my father. He was a farmer and he had a degree in agriculture, which was rare at the time that he started farming. While at university, he encountered poetry in an English class and fell in love with it. He always said he had no particular talents, which was not true. But while he was at university, he realized he needed some kind of talent to attract the girls. And since he didn't play a musical instrument or sing and was not a good athlete, he took to memorizing and reciting poetry. And this seemed to work for him. Both he and my mother inspired and nurtured my early love of poetry. My father recited poetry at odd moments when something brought a poem to mind, and on special occasions as entertainment. And he would often wake us in the morning with poetry. So this poem is called December, Beginnings and Endings. My father used to call me every year on my birthday, say the same thing about how cold it was in the days before Christmas, the year I was born. He remembered years by the weather, a drought year, late spring or early frost, a perfect September, the crop off by Thanksgiving. The last time he called, he said, it was colder than hell 60 years ago today. It was colder than hell the day he died, just before Christmas. Snow scudding ahead of us on the way into Calgary, drifts beginning to knife across the road, a white landscape bleeding into a gray sky, a grim day breaking after the 5 a.m. call. We gathered around our mother at solstice, sorting through clothes and papers, casting about for something of him, something that would speak to us. Found a recording our father had made, favorite poems he recited at our aunt's house every Christmas Eve. A gift of memory. On the drive over, moon rising full over frozen fields, snowy owl on a fence post, hair running zigzag in the car lights. At my aunt's house, carols and butter crunch, Anchi singing Stille Nacht, poetry, my father's voice. I would like to wish you all a festive season full of peace and joy, and best wishes for 2025.
Thank you, guys. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, we love you. Happy birthday, and may all your dreams come true. When you blow up the candle, one light stays aglow. It's the love light in your eyes, wherever you go.
Moving on. Okay, moving on to 8.2, debt policy, eh? That word. We have a verbal presentation from Lisa Landry on behalf of Lebu Andre, Director of Corporate Services. And I can see these are up on the screen. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Lisa Landry. I'm a finance consultant to the district. Great to see everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. Just give me 2 seconds here and I will share my screen, get the PowerPoint up. My slides don't rhyme, but they do add. Okay. So in today's Committee of the Whole, we're going to discuss debt policy. Previously, there was a discussion of the concept of a debt policy for the district. Given that was some time ago, we're going to take it from the top for everyone's benefit tonight. So just three main sections. We're going to start off kind of at the conceptual level, talking about the purpose of a debt policy, the what and why of a good debt policy, and that's the first section. Then we'll move on to the more tactical level. We'll look at the district itself, specifically the current debt levels of the district and where that sits. And then armed with that data, we have a section for discussion where we'll discuss various components that we might want to consider in having a district policy, and have council weigh in with their thoughts. So the intent, oh, sorry, clicked a little bit too much here. What is a debt policy? The intent here is to guide borrowing decisions. So having guidelines about the amount, the type, the management, and the structure of debt. We want to balance borrowing with the increased commitment that borrowing entails. And why would we want to have a debt policy? It maintains the big picture. What are our policy goals? What's our risk tolerance? A debt policy functions to support financial sustainability and provides guidance to staff, guidance to council and the public to improve the quality of debt decisions. And financial principles. When considering financial decisions, council can consider some of these financial principles and to balance them. Oh, sorry, my mouse is running away with me here. These are financial principles: sufficient, pragmatic, flexible, transparent, and balanced. And what kind of picture can we have in our minds when these principles are upheld? In terms of sufficient, revenues and expenses are sufficient to meet the district's long-term investment needs and their service level needs. In being pragmatic, we're managing and carefully considering those risks and considering the impact on the district's financial position and the district's service delivery. In being flexible, we need to ensure that financial policies allow the district the ability to respond to changing circumstances, to opportunities. Transparency, so financial strategies, plans, and processes are accessible and visible. Decisions are clear, and in being clear, that builds better understanding. And balanced. Service levels are affordable and appropriate, and we're balancing between the levels of service and the cost of that service. Okay, so debt strategy is just one of a group of interconnected strategies. All things being considered, we want to minimize debt because that reduces risk. We want to make sure that we've leaned on the other strategies, and in many cases, leaned on those strategies first. So we want to exhaust advocacy, all other avenues of debt, of funding before we looked for debt. Okay, so that's the first part. We talked a little bit about the need, the benefits of a debt policy, some principles to consider. Let's get a little bit more granular now about the specifics for the district and specifically how the district's debt position currently sits. How Tofino is currently using debt. Debt servicing costs, we try to keep them to remain as low as possible. Future debt capacity is maintained to provide for emergent needs in the future. And we have, we've been promoting less.
Oh, Lisa, we lost your sound. Just give us a second.
Okay.
Yeah, we lost.
Nothing. It just
No,
came
it just
back.
came back. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we're promoting less reliance on.
Wonder if something in the power outage problem.
So
Oh,
I'm not sure if you can hear me now.
Oh, yeah, came back.
Okay, perfect. All right, so yeah, just to finish off, we're promoting less reliance on debt due to the introduction of the capital and infrastructure levy. So that's also a key area for it is for our use of debt as well. Okay, yeah, so in terms of how the district is using debt, short-term debt is primarily equipment financing. And long-term debt has been more used for one-time major capital requirements. A few good examples that we have for that are with the water system and of course, most recently the wastewater treatment plant. So let's take a look at each of short-term and long-term debt in the next couple slides and give some figures for the districts where the district stands currently. So short-term borrowing, there are 4 different short-term borrowing options in the legislation. The district itself has mostly used short-term borrowing for equipment financing. And we anticipate to continue to do that for new equipment. Short-term borrowing is the area where we see little financial risk. And in terms of future renewals of existing equipment, that's where the C&I levy can do some heavy lifting. And we'd also look towards some internal financing also when possible. Where we sit right now, this is as of December 31st, 2023. That's our most recent audited financial statements, just slightly more than $250,000, mostly to do with equipment loan financing and some financing for our property as well. Okay, long-term borrowing. Long-term borrowing is an area where we see relatively more financial risk, more so than short-term. Not that the district's current position is risky, but just generally long-term is more risky than short-term for the reasons that short-term only spans a few years, whereas we live with long-term borrowing for decades, 20, 30 years in some cases. And that increased debt makes more fixed costs happening in longer into the future, making it harder to be flexible when you have these obligations. Minimizing risk is usually a main objective, if not the objective of a debt policy.
Ms. Landry, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
Just for clarity, what constitutes short-term and long-term?
It's roughly around the 5-year mark that you would have sort of long-term and short-term. It's probably more related to the actual asset that you're looking to. So for instance, if you're looking to borrow equipment for equipment, then that would probably be more short-term. Whereas anything that's more related to, say, a building or a wastewater treatment plant or large permanent equipment that has, a length of, 10, 20, 30 years, that's more long-term.
Thanks.
Okay. So where we sit right now with the district, the long-term debt is approximately about $1 million. That's with connection to our the water system and some housing. We also have a loan authorization bylaw on the books for up to 16 million. And so that's estimated at this time. We throughout I'll use that full amount just to be conservative in a lot of our calculations. Okay. Whoops. So now for the next piece of the puzzle.
Again.
Oh,
Yep.
lost sound, Lisa, 1 second.
No worries.
I think it's on our side. We could have somebody she could speak, and then we could have somebody read the caption in her voice.
Oh, you're back again.
There we go.
Okay.
There we go. We could get AI to do that. Good stuff. Are we good to carry on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Until the next crackle. Okay, so now for the next big piece of the puzzle, let's put these amounts that we've seen into context. And what are the legislative constraints? This is what the legislation says, summarized in one sentence. The district's annual debt payments cannot exceed 25% of specific municipal revenues.
Callahan,
Take a recess.
we'll take a 2-minute recess, Lisa.
Yeah,
Do we have
I can hear, I
surge
can hear. it
protectors on
perfectly.
all our equipment? Don't we have somebody from Public Works?
He's not an electrician.
I could try mouth it very, very carefully.
Again.
Keep going for a while.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Carry on.
Carry on. Okay, all right. Okay, so yeah, this is what the legislation says. Specified revenues times 25% must be greater than your total debt payments annually. So specified municipal revenues are essentially revenues that the municipality sets. So things like property taxes, user fees, and charges. And we'll dive into the numbers in a minute here. But I just want to take a little bit of time and make sure that this concept is clear, that it's your debt payments in a year that has to be less than 25% of revenues. And the reason why I want to just make sure that this is kind of clear for everybody is that as you start to work with it, it starts to feel like you're working backwards towards a result when you work with it. So I'll just pause for a second here. Hopefully you can still hear me. And if there's any questions, concerns. No, hearing none?
I've got a question, if that's okay, quick.
Absolutely.
Specific municipal revenues, what are those specific revenues?
Yeah, those revenues will be things like property taxes. It's anything that the municipality sets themselves, and they tend to be more recurring amounts, revenues as well. So things like property tax, user fees, user charges, all those sorts of things. For the District of Tofino, it's about 13 million. So some grants are not considered in there. It's mostly the things that the municipality sets themselves.
Okay, so would parking revenues be part of that or no?
I think it would be considered, yeah, because it would be considered under user fees.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So if that's clear, why don't we look at the numbers here? Okay, so yeah, so this is the part here, this is the part that seems inverted, and we'll go to the calculation on the next slide. They're not limiting the debt balance here, they're limiting the amount of debt payment in a year. So to put it in an everyday context, they're limiting your annual mortgage payments, but not actually the amount of mortgage on your house. And so the key thing to grasp about this is that it can be a little bit of a moving target because, of course, interest rates change. And debt payments change when you refinance, even if you have the same old amount of debt on the same house. So you could have a situation where your existing mortgage payments are fine, and then interest rates rise and your mortgage is up for renewal and suddenly your payments increased and suddenly you're not as fine. Thankfully, the MFA only refinances every 10 years, but it's just key to understand this, that we're working with forecasted rates into the future, and we're necessarily working with ranges. Okay, so I'll just pause here for a minute to see that everybody absorbed that, and if that's clear, then we'll dive into the math. Okay.
Okay, yeah, carry on.
Okay, carrying on. All right. So these are right up to date numbers that the ministry published a few weeks ago on their statistics website. This is coming from the 2023 the audited financial statements. So the district is about halfway to the legislative limits at this point. The district currently, those $13 million worth of revenues, giving room of approximately nearly $3 million of annual debt service. How much has been used so far, putting in the current amount and an estimate for the wastewater treatment plant at the full 16 million that's been authorized. shows that the district could take on another approximately nearly $1.6 million in debt payments in a year and still be within those legislative limits. Okay, now we can convert this. Let's convert this mortgage payment to an actual amount of debt, an actual mortgage amount, so we can kind of better understand what that means. If we take that 1.6 million of debt payment capacity remaining, what does that mean as further debt that could be taken on? So 1.6 at say 4.4%, which was MFA's rate as of a couple weeks ago for 20 years. That would show further debt capacity of approximately nearly $21 million. Today, the MFA rate is 4.37, so these numbers are all still pretty solid for our purposes currently. Okay, so let's put that into a bit more of a big picture. Here's the big picture summarized. If we have, say, existing debt of 17.3, that's again putting the wastewater treatment plant fully in there. We're again approximately halfway to that ministry legislative limit if we were to borrow today at current rates. Caveat that we're working with ranges and estimates here. But yeah, as we move into the next section, I'm going to ask council to maybe put their mind a little bit to how this big picture lands with you and your knowledge of the community as we get into the next section. Okay, so the point of the first part of the presentation was to introduce the topic to council, provide some data and some insight, and a few data points on where the district's position is currently, and then some concepts to consider in developing a policy. So yeah, the intent for the next section is to open it up for discussion. Staff would like to hear where council's thoughts and impressions are. And we have a couple of discussion slides that we can have a bit of a more open chat about feelings on debt policy. So just to maybe give a little bit of structure for the discussion, these are some of the components of a debt policy and some of the areas that a debt policy would cover. Most of the discussion will focus on the first two components, the guiding principles and debt limits and debt structure. So we have a couple of slides next with some prompting questions to help guide the discussion. But I think what we want to sort of achieve here is we're aiming for a balanced approach. We're balancing what we need and what we want right now with the costs and commitments that entails now and into the future. And I also really want to underline that we want a flexible approach because, well, this is a council policy and council can change it. So tying in with what we talked about just in the first half to bring it back into our minds, foundational financial principles that can help ground us and guide us. And then some debt strategies that help us manage risk and may form key underpinnings of the debt policy. So these are a good start. I thought I'd just maybe pause here and see if there's any comments or thoughts from council.
Yeah, Ms. Lundy, just a question. I assume that it's unwise to max out the borrowing, 20.8 million in our case. What is it? What's the average or what's the general debt policy for municipalities across PC? Noting that interest rates can change, and we don't know what we may need to borrow in the future. Is it like 80% of that, or is what's the? And perhaps the other question is, and I'll tag this on quick, is say we did borrow 20.8 million, and then the economy, changes, interest rates double. What happens then to our debt that isn't paid off if it goes over that 25%? Do we just increase the revenues to match, or what's the deal?
Yeah, if that were the case where interest rates rose and you had to refinance at quite a bit of a higher rate, one, you might actually go over the ministry's debt legislative limits, which would require inspector of municipalities approval. And what it would mean on the ground is that, yeah, revenues would have to go up pretty substantially to pay for that additional debt service. So it really does increase risk. It increases cost, and increases a little bit of it reduces the district's flexibility as well. Yeah. So in terms of your earlier question, I did try and do some benchmarking with different municipalities across BC. There isn't a lot of debt policies, I think primarily because they're quite hard to draft. And they're very nuanced to the municipality that they're written for. And in terms of where the average municipality sits in BC, they're quite a bit lower than these limits by a long shot. But again, there's different aspects to what type of services do those municipalities offer, or does the regional district provide for some of those services, and so it's not seen in the municipality. So it was really hard to get good benchmark data that could inform the discussion.
Okay, Ali?
Thank you. I guess an impression of mine or thoughts on that would be, I would also be hesitant to look towards maxing out the amount, given that it's dependent on revenues, which are, some of them are flexible, like paid parking, that we can control the rates we charge, but not how much the service is used. And I would be hesitant looking at having to raise rates to meet a required threshold. It is good to know that the interest rates are set, I believe you said every 10 years, so that's a little more reassuring. But yeah, I would want to be really conservative with the long-term borrowing.
Just I have a question. Is there any difference or flexibility depending on what you're borrowing for? Say, like I would consider purchase of land would be considered an asset, whereas a building which has depreciation would be slightly different. So I suspect the answer is no, but.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Councillor McMaster. It's when you're a municipality borrowing, it is primarily on the taxing authority of the municipality that they're deriving their risk. And of course, municipalities in BC borrow through the Municipal Finance Authority, which consolidates all of that taxing ability across all of BC. To come up with then go to the rating agencies, and that's why they have a AAA credit rating. But further to your point, whether you are borrowing for a wastewater treatment plant, or you're borrowing for a boat, or you're a large boat, or you're borrowing for to buy a tract of land. That's irrelevant to the rate that you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, just maybe just to flesh out a little bit more what a debt policy would entail. I can see that we wouldn't be able to use, a specific number, millions to borrow in a debt policy, because our revenues are flexible, our needs are, unrealized as yet. So would a debt policy, be, say, we can max out at 25, but a debt policy would say, well, we're only going to go to 20% to be conservative. And then how would it link to, to projects? We have multiple projects that we're looking at, anything from, the alternate water source, which is hundreds of millions, or recreation opportunities, which are potentially also in the tens to 20s of millions. So would a debt policy then sort of just basically conservative restrict us to a different percentage than 25? Would it sort of link to the OCP to help us make decisions on what we borrow? How does that look?
Yeah, a debt policy would definitely, you could look to a debt policy to have a lower debt limit than what you have with the legislation. And that's where a lot of debt policies are written to try and restrict that 25% down to a lesser number. In terms of would it actually link to any particular projects, or would it link to the OCP? I think the answer to that is that the debt policy is already assuming that you have chosen your various projects or your various areas, and now it's looking at, okay, now that you've settled on a project, what makes sense in terms of borrowing for a project, or does your policy say that you would try and get grants and exhaust all avenues of advocacy first before you go to debt? So it's more concerned with once the project is approved or is being considered, how would you fund that?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Carry on.
Okay. So yeah, just getting back to Mayor Law's question in terms of what would it cover, guiding principles, debt limits, and structure. Those are some of the things that we talked about. So we've got a couple of slides here that just kind of more flesh out. I think Mayor Law, you talked about restricting to 20% or doing various different things. So we did take a look at some of those concepts and what would kind of make sense. I mean, looking at 25%, it's a maximum. And do we want to consider a clause that further limits long-term debt? Because this 25% legislative limit applies to all municipalities in BC, regardless of size, Kelowna, Surrey, Victoria. And so the question that this slide poses is it the right fit for a smaller municipality? And is it the right fit for the Tofino context? So just in thinking about this, some of the things that came to mind were, of course, a higher debt burden increases your financial risk, increases your cost, reduces your flexibility. Tofino being a smaller community with a smaller tax base, there's situations where the infrastructure needs in Tofino can be higher than another town with the equivalent number of residents. That's indicative of visitation levels, peaks in visitation. It's indicative of the relative remoteness of the community and maybe some of the conditions on the West Coast in terms of building. Another concept that to think about for a policy limit in your debt policy is that it may help with future funding discussions with the ministry. You can lay out like this is our policy limits that we have and that's within our community, and that can also help in terms of the ministry wanting to max things out or anything like that. Yeah. So just in terms of, we did some analysis about some of the different percentages. So just to put this back in the big picture here, about halfway there, this is what the ministry's 25% limit looks like. And here it is again in the box, along with 20% and 15%. And we can walk through those scenarios. We've got our existing debt here of, say, $17 million. And then for the 20% scenario, that would mean a future debt capacity of another, say, 12 million. I'm sorry? Was there a question?
No, I don't think there was a question.
Okay. And so at 20%, that gets us about 77% to the ministry's 25% limit. How close is the district now to that? It's about 59% to that total limit of about 30 million there. 15%, we'd be looking at a future debt capacity of about 3.6. That would be taking the ministry's limit and almost halving it. And how close are we to that ceiling now? We're about 83% to that ceiling now. So here's some thoughts that ran through my mind as I've been looking at these different rates. And 20% still felt risky. I'm thinking in terms of contingency that is often used when we're budgeting projects. We often have a contingency of, say, like, 15, 20%. And that's usually for a project that's pretty well scoped. And so that 20% limit from the 25% basically puts us to an area where we have enough contingency for a project that would be maybe well scoped. So that felt a little risky. 15% felt a little overly constrained. At that level, like I said, we were about halfway to the ministry's limit. We would basically, the district would have room for, say, one medium largest project of like 3.5, and that's about it. And that would be for probably the next 20 years, simply because the debt has to be repaid before you get that debt room back. So using those, the 20 and the 15 as bookends, and kind of went in between, 17% puts the district at about 65% of the ministry's limit, so giving about 35% of room. We could potentially, the district, accommodate another $7 million of borrowing, say, so that would possibly be another two medium or largish projects, and available in that 17%. So I think maybe I'll just pause there and take questions and see if there's any comments about those benchmarks.
I'm trying to formulate it. I kind of feel like it makes sense to just leave it open as an option to utilize if we ever needed to use it. I mean, if we've already agreed that we're going to exhaust all of our other options before looking at debt anyway, and then everything that we would be looking to borrow on would come across this sort of table or our financial planning, this seems like a little bit of overkill to go in and restrict it. And just trying to think from the other side of the table, using this as a way to like leverage getting additional money out of like upper levels of government. I could easily see somebody at a ministerial table saying, well, this is your policy. This isn't the policy that we are imposing on you. You have the ability to do this. You have the ability to change your policy. So I don't necessarily see it as like a bargaining chip. But that's just my viewpoint on this. I obviously don't think we should ever borrow to the maximum amount. I would be very against that, but I also would worry about limiting ourselves. Then we get into a situation where we're looking to do the water expansion and suddenly we're not able to borrow because we've said, oh, we're gonna limit ourselves to 3 million when we could potentially have up to 20 million. That's it.
Any comments, Lisa?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some other ways that you can also approach that as well. I mean, the simpler one would be to change the 25 to a different number. And additional to that, you could also have some criteria or some parameters outside of which you would go outside of that. Because yeah, you could, if you wrote it as a hard and fast rule, then that would be your limit. But if there are exceptions and or areas that the council might want to still step beyond that, that could also be written in the policy as well. In terms of the ministry, not really responding to that, I mean, they could say, look, this is our legislation and you've got your policy and we don't care because this is our legislation and you can go up to that. I mean, they could say that, although it is a signal, not only to the ministry, but also to the community. And the ministry would know that this is a signal to the community as well, that, you know, we are conscious of not taking on too much debt. And so we're putting a line in the sand. Whether or not that would fully work with the ministry, I mean, it really kind of depends on what ministry and what political party we have in power at that time. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple other slides later on just kind of talking about like when would the council want to step beyond this limit. And that's something that we could also put in there to kind of address your concerns about why do we want to put a limit on here. It's for this council, but it's also for future councils as well, to try and provide for that. Another way to formulate this is to talk about the property tax increase in any one given year. That's another formula that could be used as well. It's a little more complex, but you could say, you know, we wouldn't want to have property taxes go up by more than X% in any given year as a result. I can see that Councillor Sloman has her hand up.
Sarah?
Yeah, my comfort level would be kind of in between the 20 and 17%. I feel like the 15% is a little bit too low because it would really restrict us. But I just feel like the 25% would really add a lot of cost to taxpayers, and I just don't feel comfortable with that, having that limit there. Yes, I understand we probably would try to never reach that, but if that's in our policy, it would essentially be available to you. So I like the number of having a future debt capacity of another 10 million, because I feel like that could serve a few things, but I feel like the 17% is a little low. So I guess I'd be more leaning towards the 20%.
Okay, yep. And I've actually got a slide where I have done every point in between. So we can take a look at that as well. I'll just scroll to that. Here's 19, 18, 17, and 16, just for council to take a look and see.
Dan's got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Landry. We've only recently had the water source feasibility study. I think the highest number on one of those options was 200 million, and the preliminarily preferred option was 178 million. Clearly that, noting the government stacking regulations, which I always forget if it's 73%, is it 73% or 77%? 73%, that leaves 27%. So 27 million on 100 million, and we're well over 100 million for almost every option. So, even while we're considering this, debt policy, we're also looking at infrastructure, just one infrastructure project that blows even the 25% out of the water. I think we would have to double. It appears to me that we would have to double our revenues and then still max out the 25% for any one of those options. So it's just a bit, I think I'm just thinking about this policy in conjunction with our water source feasibility study. And also noting that we have other projects that we have been trying to forward because of other needs in our community, like recreation, et cetera. So it's like, how do you do that when you do a debt policy, when you've got this looming giant bill and limits already?
Yeah. I think, well, in terms of, you can have a clause in the policy that brings you back up to the 25. But further to your point, once you're past that 25, then we're talking, inspector of municipalities has to approve this and everything else, because it's going to be outside of even the ministry's level in the legislation. Yeah. And just in terms of what what kind of increase to revenues that means.
I'm listening to this today and I'm thinking of Mr. Freeland's guardrails, which got blown out of the water this afternoon. So let's hope to give you a presentation to Justin tomorrow. Any more questions? Okay, let's carry on.
Okay, all right. Back to where we were. Okay, so that's back to our not individual scenarios. And then this is, we've already alluded to this, what if a critical need arises? Do we want to allow current, future council some ability to respond if there's a critical need, an unforeseen situation? We could set the policy as a hard stop, which we've kind of explored as, maybe overly limiting. Or do we want to have some limited flexibility in some critical situations? Our debt policy, in order to be a policy, needs to have some teeth, and so we'll need some strong parameters. The situation should be the exception, not the rule. But yeah, and capturing this in policy will definitely take some thought. Yeah, we could do that as an option for what situations would qualify for that. I think I'll just maybe pause there for a little bit of discussion to see if that reduces the concern about overly limiting, or if it's something that that we feel we want to keep it where it is.
I have a question. My question is, do we really need a policy? Because if we have a policy, we said a debt limit, I guarantee we'll go and spend it. Can we not just look at things on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I think that's probably what the district has been doing up until the wastewater treatment plant. And yeah, definitely this is up to council's purview if they want to have a policy like this, or if they don't want to have a policy like this. I think where a policy might be helpful is that it might provide a bit more of the bigger picture, because when you are looking at a case by case, sometimes the case, the project itself, it starts to direct the decision, as opposed to having some parameters and some thought put in terms of what the overall picture would look like. That's kind of the purpose of the debt policy, is just to kind of guide. Yes, decisions will be made on a case-by-case basis as the projects come up, but also it kind of forces a look to the bigger picture.
I could debate that one. Yeah. I have a credit card limit. I can spend up to that limit if I don't have a limit. Anyway, Dan has a question. Go on.
And then I have one.
Thank you, Chair McMaster, and thank you, Lisa, for the presentation so far. Lisa and I have been working pretty closely on this policy, having overseen the district's finances over the last 12 years and considered, a significant infrastructure project that we were mandated and required to do. It has taken a significant portion, almost half of our debt servicing capacity. So in presenting the options that Ms. Landry did today, looking at that 17% is something that we didn't consider lightly, and that isn't necessarily where we need to go. But that 17% includes some consideration for the recreation facility, which we have a debt servicing bylaw to third reading, which is looking at about a $3 million borrow, just under. And that would leave also room for any emergent repair or replacement that may come up, a major, like a reservoir replacement, which we had so many years ago now, but it would leave room for something that we could respond to quite quickly. Knowing that we're halfway to our borrowing ceiling, we know that the reality of it is we don't have likely the contribution to fund, the preferred options in our water feasibility study. If I were to just put all the projects aside, which I did in examining this policy, and I do highly recommend council considers a debt policy, because otherwise it turns into a first come, first served project, and perhaps there are a set of priorities that the community or council would like to consider in terms of borrowing. If water supply is the priority, then there is an option or opportunity to preserve the remainder of borrowing capacity. I'm not saying you want to do this, but as an example, preserve the remaining of our borrowing capacity for water only. That can be done in a policy, and it would restrict, and it would make very careful decision making going forward. Likely that decision is quite a ways out for us, and we need some time to do that. And in the meantime, we likely want to preserve some of our borrowing capacity, but continue to be able to make decisions. So we were trying to strike a balance with the proposal of a debt policy. Going to the maximum, and I'll end my comments here, going to the maximum borrowing capacity, I'd be very careful about us doing that. If we were to put it into context, that $16 million we just borrowed is about a $1 million servicing cost over 30 years. And we were able to apply other sources of funds to service that debt. So we're looking at about 50%, about $500,000 a year debt or tax increase to service that debt right now. We won't necessarily have the opportunity to bring other sources of funds forward to service another $20 million in debt. So we're looking at, over $1 million per year, with, with favorable interest rates to go out and tax the community. And $1 million very recently was not, it's not doable for us. So I think that, yes, we do need a policy. I strongly encourage council to look in that direction. I think there is more of a discussion to have here in terms of what the language will look like. We could play out some scenarios, based on priority projects that council may have in their strategic plan. And then also continue to look at the water source feasibility study and how that may work with a policy of that nature. Today was about getting the concept in more real terms in front of council. If we were to get a policy, with some draft language in front of council at a committee of the whole for discussion, we can look at some scenario-based exercises for consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have one, just a comment, maybe a question as well, tacked on there. And I just want to go back. I was just doing the math in my head, about $1 million. That's what we're into right now. And leaving potentially to get to the existing 25%, another $1 million of debt servicing at current rates. Now that would be about 25% of our property tax, somewhere around there, just to get there. So just to max it out would see potentially a 25% property tax increase. So maybe going forward, I think it'd be interesting just to it would help me and maybe other people as well to understand the tax implications of the scenarios as well. And I know those are floating. We know that we have a certain amount of non-tax revenue that we're putting against the wastewater treatment plant, which may or may not stay there. It may, we don't know. We don't have control over that at all. But to put things in tax, generally in a tax increase lens as well, so that we know, is it 25% increase, 20% increase? What does that mean for the average residential homeowner? And that will also help us make decisions as well. What are people paying for and what are they willing to pay for? Because that's at the end of the day, that's what we have to do, is represent, what people here with their homes and businesses are willing to pay for.
I have a historical question. It appears that council received a nearly, not identical, but highly similar PowerPoint presentation in 2019. What was the outcome of that? Because that was supposed to, did council at that time decide not to go forward with this policy? Because the next steps from that presentation said that a policy would come back to us, but obviously a policy never came back, and we are getting this presentation again.
To the chair, Councillor Thomas. So Staff did not have an opportunity until now to respond to that resolution, so the policy is still outstanding and this is the next step in that discussion.
Ali?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm favorable towards a reduced percentage policy. Simply for the fact that I would like to be in a position where we're responding to changing revenues before we hit our max target. So if our policy lines out 17 or 18 or 19% and revenues change, maybe we do away with pay parking, maybe something changes in there. And we would be able to respond to that before it would come to a point where we would have to raise taxes to hit the 25% mark. So I would be in favor of that sort of cautious approach.
Pay parking is minuscule compared to property taxes.
I know, but everything, there are certain revenue sources that are flexible user fees, some that aren't. And yeah, we're a little town and you add them all up, like they do count on their own.
I like Dan's idea of relating this to property tax increases because that's what we need to sell to the public. Another question, comment?
I was gonna ask if they're, what staff are looking for feedback from council, like are we supposed to pick our preferred scenario, or what would you like?
Through the chair, I don't think we need to decide necessarily tonight. I think the concept that that we presented this evening is to consider an upper limit, but be able to go beyond that for more critical infrastructure needs, and which would be well defined in the policy. So, you know, I don't think our intent was to take away any of the debt servicing limit necessarily through a policy. We wanted to sort of get a sense from where council may be at, and it sounds like we want to be more conservative and allow ourselves a little bit more room, even go to the upper limit of the policy. So we could propose some language that if council is generally comfortable with having sort of an upper limit below the debt service, the provincial or ministry limit, but be able to go beyond that to maximum limit and what that would look like. We can choose a starting point in a draft policy, and then we can have further discussion about it at a committee of the whole.
Everybody agreeable with that? I'm not seeing any objections to that.
Councillor Sloman,
She was right.
okay.
Have you got anything else to say, Lisa, or?
No, I think that's good. I think just in terms of we talked about critical need. One of the other questions was just, do we want to repay debt early if possible? If that's something that council would like to see in a policy like that. Because it would be beneficial to increase future borrowing capacity. That increases our flexibility. So I don't know if council has a thought on that. We could probably put together some different chunks of text and then have that for our for another committee of the whole. I think Councillor Soman has her hand up.
Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I like the idea of having something in there to pay a back debt quicker.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't like just passing on debt down the road to other generations.
You know, I'd prefer if debt, there was a difference, difference between debt that was paid down early and debt that wasn't. If there's, debt for an asset that has the potential to bring in revenue, for instance, say a house or something like that, then I could see paying that down depending on the interest rate. And then that would then, of course, up our revenues and increase our debt ceiling potentially. But, I wouldn't see paying down a long-term debt, say for the wastewater treatment plant or something like that, I think maybe there's maybe it's not as easy as paying down debt. It might be paying down certain debts and not other debts, and depending on the class of debt, you know what I mean? That would be my two bits. And maybe that doesn't matter at all, and I'm not an accountant.
Through the chair, it does matter quite a bit. Having the flexibility at a staff level to repay different types of debt could be favorable to the municipality in a couple different ways. And one of them is if we are forced to lock in debt in a particularly high interest rate environment, the debt's locked in for or fixed for 10 years with MFA, we may have the opportunity to repay it before it gets refinanced in another high interest rate environment. So there could be some scenarios. So it is quite important.
Okay. All right, well, I think that gives us some good stuff to work with. Just want to make sure before we close out this section, was there any other policy components that that council wanted to weigh in on? Or any other items? Did we collect everything?
Anything from anybody?
Yeah.
No, I think you're good to go.
Okay, all right. Well, just in terms of next steps, I think we can draft some language, taking everything that we've heard today, the discussion and the suggestions from council. We've also got some resources we could take a look at as well, and maybe bring some of that text back to a future committee of the whole for council consideration.
Sounds good. Any more questions? Okay, thanks.
Just one comment, is that all right? Can I just do one quick comment? If we do, when it comes back, if we do have that tax, property tax implication, can that also be, not just a straight up number, but also in conjunction with what we see a trend of tax increases over time, so that it's not just a tax increase related to the debt servicing or potential debt servicing, but also on top of that, potential other sources. So council doesn't get the an artificially low number. For instance, if we go to the max, it's 25% tax increase to max out that would be on top of what we would see for inflation, what we would see for, our general increases. It might actually be 32%. And so just to keep that in mind when it comes back to council.
Yeah, fair enough. And what we could also do is even do it in terms of $1 million increments. So council could get a sense of every $1 million on top of what you've got already would be another X point whatever percent for property tax. I think that can kind of give it a better sense of it. And then show what the 25 number would look like as well. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Lisa. That was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. Okay, any further questions through the chair from council?
I think you can go and have supper now.
Fantastic. I will do that. Great. Thank you.
Thanks again. Okay, moving on. 8.3. Filming on location in Tofino policy review. Available report from Community Services. Cindy Hutchins, PowerPoint. Hi, Cindy.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am standing in for Cindy Hutchison, Manager of Community Programs this evening, and she's under the weather. I have a very brief presentation. We'll wait till it comes up on filming on location in Tofino. We have an existing policy. The district has an existing policy on filming on location. It goes back to 1997 when the policy was developed, and there's a resolution there from Mr. Anderson, who is not with us this evening, but is still on council. There's the policies come up in front of council a couple of times, and most recently, council referred this particular policy to CDAC in 2016, which is a committee that is no longer doesn't no longer exist. More recently, filming in Tofino has changed substantially. We have larger productions, we have more productions. And the fees that were initially established to mirror the fees in Pacific Rim National Park are, while they were once thought to be very expensive, are now, inflation has caught up, I suppose. And with demand here on the coast for filming, and the park has actually since increased its fees. Filming has changed as well. We do get a lot of requests for still photo shoots, whether it's furniture set up on Chesterman Beach and being photographed. Currently, our filming policy does not cover any of that type of activity. Also filming now, it's like influencers, social media, content creation, smaller scale production as well. It's changed a lot, and our policy does not address any of those things. Filming, can be an inconvenience on the community in the summertime, when we're quite busy and more congestion is a headache, but it can also be a great economic development opportunity in shoulder and off season when things are quieter, hotel rooms are empty, restaurants and other businesses would like that business. This is council's policy, so it does need to come to council to make changes to it. Some of the changes that staff would like to make are administrative amendments, just updating it, separating the procedures from the policies application forms, taking those out of the policies so we can update those as needed. And then also just general updates to modernize the policy. We would, to do this, connect with external organizations, other folks like our Film Commission, Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, partners in the community that are involved in filming. And we also have some folks in the community that are quite involved in filming as well, so we work with them to help them out and improve the policy. We'd also review the fees and look at if there is a way to incentivize off-season filming rather than having the same fees for the entire season. And of course, we would also have some public consultation. That was a very quick rundown, but essentially, staff is requesting that staff be directed to prepare authorization or be authorized to prepare amendments to the filming on location policy for council's consideration.
Any questions? Okay. You got a question?
No, I just have a comment.
Okay.
I don't need a comment. I have a confession. I read this policy as the proposed policy. And I ran and complained to Nyla, so she told me, so I just want to say I'm super in favor.
It's an outdated, very old policy that we wanted to update.
Let's get rid of it.
Does this policy include drones, filming from drones now?
That is often something we get requests for, and there's a permitting process through the Ministry of Transportation for things like that. So that would be captured in the policy as well.
Okay. Right, would someone like to move the recommendation?
I'll move that staff be authorized to prepare amendments to the filming on location in Tofino policy for public consideration.
Seconder. Thank you, Council Stewart. All those in favour? Opposed? Recommendations carried. I'll call how long do you want? 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minute bathroom break.
Evening, Mayor and Council. The PowerPoint gets up on the screen here. So today I'm going to be providing an overview of the district's interim housing needs report, which was recently completed to address new information requirements by the province. The report is fairly dense on numbers, so I'll do my best to provide a high-level summary and focus on the bit of a structure of the presentation. I'm going to do a general background and context, high-level overview of the reports and key takeaways, considerations, and then next steps. So for background, since 2019, the province has required local governments to complete housing needs reports in line with certain content requirements. And as you know, the district adopted its most recent housing needs report in 2021 in line with those requirements. The slide here says DELEGATION was amended in June 2024, but that in fact was amended in the fall of 2023, so just to note that. So in the fall of 2023, the province passed new legislation which updated the content requirements for housing needs reports. And this included a new housing projection method. And it also mandated that OCPs and zoning bylaws be updated to accommodate housing projections contained in the reports. So the new legislation also required local governments to complete what they're calling interim updates to their existing housing needs reports by January 1st, 2025. That's why this item is on the agenda today. These interim housing needs reports were required to reflect 3 additional pieces of information. This information included housing demand projections for both 5 and 20-year time horizons based on a new standardized methodology. The second piece was a statement on the need for housing in close proximity to active and alternative forms of transportation. And finally, a description of the actions taken by local governments since the latest housing needs report to address housing needs. To complete these new legislative requirements, the district hired McCullough Development Services and Turner Drake and Partners, who were the consultants who completed the most recent housing needs report. And they provided this update for us. So in the next few slides, I'm going to be highlighting the main results and takeaways from the housing unit projections portion of the housing needs report. So this slide shows the housing unit projections for 2026, which is the 5-year time horizon, and 2041, which is the 20-year time horizon. Just for clarity, the data was based from 2021, so that's why the 5-year shows 2026. As you can see, the methodology required the consideration of 6 specific components that represent current and anticipated housing needs. And so here we see components A, B, C, and E taken together reflect the total number of housing units required to meet housing needs of the existing population. And they're also an approximation of the existing housing shortage. For this chart, this works out to be about 56 units by 2026 and 201 units by 2041. And then the next components, D and F, represent the number of units required to meet anticipated growth that is above and beyond the existing population. And so in this case, for the year 2026, that we're set to about 192 units and 624 units by 2041. So this slide and the slide after it reflect additional analyses that the consultants provided that go above and beyond the new legislative requirements. And the intent here was to disaggregate the overall unit numbers shown in the previous slide to sort of tell a broader story of market type, size, and tenure of the units. I don't want these tables to distract too much, so I'll just focus on high-level observations before getting into the main takeaways in one of the next slides. So in this table, we generally see a higher need for larger market units and a greater demand for smaller affordable units. And then this table here shows a breakdown of ownership versus renter demand. And in general, we can see the demand for ownership units is greater in the market sector, though demand for rental units only take up almost 50% of the overall unit demand. So here are the key takeaways from the unit projections in the report. Some of this is a bit of a reiteration from previous slides. But the first one is the district may require 248 units by 2026 and 825 units by 2041, not considering price, size, or tenure. Also by 2041, the district may need an additional 535 market units and 290 portable or below market units. And we're using the terminology may here because these are projections, these are estimates and need to change. Market housing should remain the primary contributor to the local housing supply, though there is still a strong need for non-market housing. The next one is market demand tends to focus on 2 and 3 bedroom units, whereas non-market needs skew towards smaller units. And finally, a sort of takeaway is the historical shortage of housing across the housing continuum has been a major factor in price escalation. In other words, sufficient supply can impact the price positively. So here are some considerations next steps. One of the key points that I want to convey is that these numbers should be treated as a general guide to inform policy and decisions on housing. And the district is not required to hit the unit projections, but rather we need our responsibility under the new legislation is to ensure that our OCP and our zoning bylaw allow for this capacity to be met. It doesn't require those units to be built. One of the things that the consultants also pointed out is that the standardized projection methodology mandated by the province tends to, or it may overestimate demand for smaller communities. This is sort of a function of the smaller population sample size versus larger urban centers. The smaller the data, the higher the likelihood for things like overestimation to occur. That said, while the methodology isn't perfect, I think the advantage of having a standardized methodology moving forward in the future is the ability to repeat the same process consistently, and then you have an opportunity to establish a trend. And under legislation, we will be required to update these projections every 5 years. Moving forward, I think the report is intended to be used as supplemental information to assist in the review of things like development applications and housing policy. And then as I mentioned, in 2025, the district will be responsible for ensuring that the OCP and the zoning bylaw is reflecting the high level projections in this interim housing needs report. Our deadline to do that is December 31st of 2020. So that's a high level overview, and that leads me to the recommendation, which is to receive this report as information.
I have a question. I mean, I read the report. I didn't quite understand the methodology as to how Nicole and the other group acquired all this information. Can you give me some insight to that?
I'm not a statistician. I am not a data expert, and so I can certainly receive specific questions about the methodology, but I won't be able to explain it in detail. The report does, as you sort of alluded to, provide a general explanation on the report, but if you have specific questions on methodology, I can take those back, pose them to
I'll think about that. And my second question was, you've mentioned the OPC and zoning, but we've been talking about limits to growth policy such a long time now. Will this factor in there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Thank you, Councillor McMaster. At this point, it's unclear how the province will sort of, I guess, enforce districts with demonstrating that their OCPs are allowing for the capacity to accommodate these additional units. At this point, I don't want to sort of guess. I think it's probably worth asking that question in more detail once we go through the exercise of updating the OCP by the end of the year next year. But it's certainly something for consideration. I can see, just in having been involved in the limits of growth policy discussion, certainly our current water supply would limit our ability to achieve the 825 units that this report is talking about by 2041. So yeah, absolutely, that will be an important consideration.
Thank you. Just a question, given that this report was prepared a while ago, is it taking into consideration the markets that were put into, or the units that were put into the market by Headwaters, Sharp Road, and the planned further developments?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councilor Sawyer. So this report was based on 2021 census data. The general projection numbers didn't take into account specific community developments that occurred since 2021. I think we can certainly do that exercise and you can sort of subtract those specific units from the projections that we see. But to answer your question in simple terms, no, the numbers you see don't take into account those developments. But again, I would say that these are not absolute numbers that we need to strive to achieve. These are general guide roadmaps. And yeah, I think I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. If I can have a quick follow-up. Thank you. I think it's just an important point to bring up because I feel that looking at what went on with filling the residency requirements for Headwaters and how we saw those units filled, what's still available, the timelines it took, and the fact that we've already had vacancies occur, I think is a really important thing to remember. Like that in itself is a great case study for what we need to see for the community.
Yeah, I got a couple questions before some comments to council, but I would like to see the standardized methodology to see how they got, their conclusions. And also the report talks about suppressed households. What is the definition of suppressed households? I mean, what does that mean?
I can tell you, yes, and these are provincially sort of arrived upon definitions. You bring up the slide. I had a bonus slide that had definitions. So yeah, questions. Oh, class. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's not in this. It's in I
can find it.
Previous slides. If not, it's in this report.
I think it was in the report.
Unable to quorum, constrained housing environments, low vacancy rates, high rent prices, rising. I think suppressed houses were houses that wanted to like upgrade. It's like say you were expanding family and you wanted to move into a 3-bedroom house instead of a 2-bedroom, you'd be a suppressed house.
Oh, was that in the appendix or in that?
I had it in front of you.
Okay.
Read it out loud.
Sure. No, that's okay. I got it. So it was, well, go ahead. You can read it.
Oh, I just. Unit is defined. I apologize.
All right, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, so it's defined here as households that were unable to form between 2006 and the present due to a constrained housing environment. So I think an example that was given to me by the consultant was imagine a household where you have adult children living with their parents, but they were unable to move out of their family home because there were insufficient options for them to move out at the time. So in that case, you would potentially have two households living in one household, and those children who are unable to move out, those represent a suppressed household. And so a healthy housing sort of market would be one in which those children would be able to move out into their home place.
Some comments.
Let's see if we get any questions.
No, I don't think I have any particular questions. I did find it interesting that we only needed 2 rentals to be added to get our vacancy rate of 3% for rentals, but I thought that perhaps could not possibly be true. And we've definitely built more than 2 units between 2021 and now, and I'd be curious to see what our rental vacancy rate is, but according to this, we've solved it.
Yeah, and I think that's just a good example of how these numbers shouldn't necessarily be taken as you know, truth. They're general guide maps, and I think that the value will be in another 5 years when we repeat this process using the same methodology. Sort of establish it.
Certainly.
Comment, Dan?
Yeah, maybe a quick preamble to my comments, Mr. Later. I've expressed my dismay at the previous McCullough needs assessment. I don't have to go over that again, but I think one of the things that's carried through here is the suggestion of where affordable housing should go, and this report again suggests that affordable housing should really focus on 0 to 1 bedroom dwellings, and I think my question for you, and I know you didn't write this report, and maybe just a question to consider for staff is, a 0 and 1 bedroom unit, if that's the focus of affordable housing going to the next 5 to 20 years, the present 0 to 1 bedroom units max out at 2, so they cannot house more than 2 people. The average household in Tofino is 2.4 people. So like, I'm just wondering how, they got to this methodology where, the primary affordable housing units that we're supposed to build cannot house the average household and exclude essentially children. So that's odd to me. And I find it, like the previous housing needs assessment, I'm not sure where they got the methodology to come up with that. And, I'm going to go on, I'm going to talk to council, but I just want to let you know and maybe get some feedback. Like, did you talk about that with these folks? And did you discuss the, the fact that we're missing some demographic here and this is not solving the problem?
Yeah, thank you for the comment, Mayor Law. I think, one, it's a fair comment. It perhaps is an example where we see projections or estimations not matching observations on the ground in the community, which is fair. I think one thing that I'll say is the numbers here, they're not necessarily recommendations. They're just projections, and they're projections of need and demand. And so I think you're right to scrutinize the methodology here, but these are just, they are methods based on the best data that we have, and they're spitting out numbers and projections, and so they're estimations. Again, these are not requirements, so there's nothing stopping us from enabling zoning that or projects that include a larger variety of different sizes of units for affordable housing. People want to see more 2 and 3 bedroom affordable units. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. I think the intent of this report is to sort of allow for a little bit of it will guide decision making a little bit. So if we want to enable a development that has a X proportion of X number of units, then I think the value of this report would be to sort of use this report as a sort of benchmark guide to understand whether that general proportion is appropriate. But I think using the projections as a rule here for this report is not the intent. But I can certainly follow up on the methodology if that is something that you're interested in.
Just a follow-up question to that. Yeah, I'd love to hear the methodology. And the other thing is, you know, these reports have power, they have weight. They are informing our OCP, you know, they're informing our zoning review, rewrite. There is, you know, the potential to have major implications on what the Tofino Housing Corporation builds, right? So it's not arbitrary, it's real to me. So my question is, if I find the conclusion in this unacceptable because of, you know, maybe some things I think they missed in their methodology, or maybe knowledge on the ground, or different ways of you know, maybe interpreting statistics using real census data. What are my options or council's options if council agrees? I mean, that's the question. Is like,
thank you for the question. I think so. These are mandated methodologies from the province. Unless the province changes how they require communities to do the projections, that can't change, that won't change. And the district has a responsibility, a legislative obligation to continue to use the methodology that the province requires. So you don't have a lot of sort of leeway there. I think, you know, there could be, speaking in turn here, but there could potentially be, you know, I guess there's always options to get better data to do our own studies, but I just want to be clear that this interim housing needs report was done solely to you know, achieve the requirements from the province based on legislation.
one follow-up. My question is, I mean, I understand the methodology and I'd love to see the methodology, but the conclusions that are drawn, sort of affordable, and this is where the rubber hits the road for me, is the conclusion that affordable housing should be primarily 0 and 1 bedrooms. Is that a result of the methodology, or is that an interpretation of the, you know, these consultants? That would be my question. That's where I would go for it and say, like, you know, because I disagree. And I don't, you know, maybe this is a comment for council, and you're off the hook. I'm not aiming at you, but I would be extremely hesitant to support a report that I did not agree with. And you know, I could back it up, but that's where I'm at, right? Like, and I just kind of need a way forward.
And just I mean, we're getting a lot of questions about methodology, so I think that needs to be cleared up, because I mean, I didn't know the methodology was mandated by the province.
Just to be clear, the methodology was mandated for the overall housing unit requirements. The breakdown of the unit sizes and the rental versus ownership projections, those were not mandated.
Okay.
Those were the methodologies that McCullough and the consultants
So if we used a different set of consultants in 5 years' time, would they be using the same methodology or process? Or? Okay, I've got a question from Councillor Sloman before we go to you guys. Sarah.
I don't actually have a question, I have a comment.
Go ahead.
So I'm kind of feeling like I don't agree with the non-market solutions distributing more 0 to 1 bedroom dwellings over 2 to 3 bedroom units, because I feel like 2 to 3 bedroom units could be filled by those individuals. Whereas if if trends turn to like, oh, in 5 years, we need more non-market 2 to 3 bedrooms, those families can't, or mixed people, say roommates, they can't shed people to fit into a 0 to 1 bedroom, but the people who would be dwelling in a 0 to 1 bedroom could be more versatile to fit into 2 to 3 bedroom unit.
Holly?
Yeah, and hearing Councillor Sloman's comment, I also feel that the needs for rental versus market and affordable housing, it's slightly skewed because there's still a large number of people living in illegal suites and trailers, and that wouldn't be reflected in census. Or even a lot of word of mouth data. Like, I think there's just not a lot of people going forward to be like, oh yeah, I've got 6 people living on my property in RVs. So I think there is a huge missing chunk of the population that's not being recorded just because people are not going to volunteer that information because it would then lead to them becoming homeless.
Yeah, that's why THC did a housing needs assessment, and Ian went around and talked to all the property owners and things like that. You wanna?
Yeah, I was just gonna share some input into the housing needs assessment calculator and how they pulled this up. So if you type in for the housing needs assessment methodology for BC, there is a company called HEART, the housing needs assessment tool, has a free calculator. It just pulls census data from Tofino. If you run that, we get the exact same numbers that these people have given us. It's not broken down by what they think, like the units we need, but that's where it came from. So Dan, you might want to dig into this, and there might be some more information about how they do those calculations, because it just seems that they've pulled data from a census. Calculations have been done, you pull up the exact same numbers. So I do a little bit question what we've paid this company to do when there's a free calculator that just did all of that for us. And then where they're figuring out what kind of units we need without having done any sort of on the ground research, it appears, which is a little bit concerning. I'll send you the links.
That was, I mean, that was my criticism of the original Macola Housing Needs Assessment in a nutshell, is that it was data that was, in my opinion, uncritically vetted. And I just want to throw something out here for council. This is, you know, we the 2021 census data has Tofino having 35 teens between 15 and 17. Now, all of our demographic, BC-wide, local, we should suggest that we should have 76 or more teens, and so they're not here. And that was my criticism at the time, is that this is a demographic that is missing because they're not being supported for multiple reasons, but housing is one of them. And if we just want to get up to a baseline normal, we would need to somehow support those teens and their families. And even at the minimum family standard, we're looking at 100 people, that those 100 people would have children, like one of those is a children, like that's the deal. And that's my problem with the non-methodology conclusions that this report suggests, is that that's the housing, that the affordable housing that we, this suggests on to, the OCP and would not support those people. And that's just one small example. So it's kind of a continuation of, what Kat mentions, what I mentioned before. And so maybe, I know Ms. Tatiana's got her hand up and we've talked briefly about this, but that's my problem. So I'm looking for a way forward where I can, where I can support a housing needs assessment review like this is, without, in my mind, what I would consider an unacceptable conclusion on this one point. So that's what I'm kind of looking for. But again, I'm part of council, but I would argue to council that, and this is my final feel, is that we're not responsible for everything in the district, and we don't have power over everything, but we have chosen to be responsible for affordable housing. And through the THC, we have power. And it seems to me that with me personally, it would be unacceptable to take that responsibility and that ability to create housing and then not serve children and average families. It doesn't make sense to me. So, and I know this is a suggestion, but it will have power in perpetuity unless that's addressed. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Alex, for the report. And I just want to remind council that, Alex was directed by his director to work with the consultants and provide the report. And this is the report that council has today. So I would like to relieve this letter from Mr. Letter from the lectern, because I think he's answered all of council's questions. I understand that. So thank you, Alex. And I do think that council has concerns with the methodology that was used by the consultants and requires a bit more information on that. And we can bring that forward. Council can continue to have discussion on it, but I think we'll sort of gain from council's discussion what further information needs to be provided. That being said, we do have a deadline from the province to approve an interim housing needs assessment. Whether we meet that deadline or not, I don't think is going to have severe consequences. So it is entirely up to council if you'd like to receive the report as it was presented. Staff's comments will remain as is in the report, but if there's a desire to receive more information before the recommendation is considered, then we can certainly do that. I'm not sure it's a great use of time this evening to get into how the consultants may have come up with the information and the data. I think that we should give staff the time to go back to the consultant and find that information and provide it to council in the new year if you wish. So in terms of a way forward, I would have council consider the recommendation, and if it's not able to be considered this evening, then we'll come back with more information.
My concern is if we don't accept this with this January 1st, 2025 deadline, will it have any influence on some of the grants we're applying for from, CMHC or BC Builds or?
I think that's a great question and something to be considered and concerned about.
Yeah.
And just going back to staff's comments earlier, this won't necessarily hold us to a specific methodology. However, by or number of units or makeup of units, but when applying for funding, this is a report that the funders will look at as well. So there's a risk to like both.
Yeah, my concern is that personally, and Mr. Later, I have no criticism of you, just to make sure that I was trying to look at council with my concern. My concern is just that, is that if we accept this report and then it goes to BC Builds or whatever, and they say, oh no, you have to build all 0 1-bedroom because that's what it says in the thing, then we have to come back and say, no, we're not going to do that. And they would ask us why. Why aren't you doing what your interim housing needs report says you should do? Then we're in a bit of a quagmire. So personally, I am, beginning to be in the stronger state to say, if I have a significant issue with a conclusion or a recommendation in a report, then just to reject it and come back with some better information before I would vote to accept it. So that's where I am at. But that's me.
If I put my THC hat on, I'll say that it's the 3-bedroom units that are sitting empty.
RGI.
Yeah,
The issue is RGI. You're trying to, but that's a whole question about the rent geared to income is again not local, and that's the question. That's another point where we're trying to say there is a local reality that people here know that isn't getting to the province in the policies that matter And then we get an issue where all of a sudden we've got a 3-bedroom. Rent geared income's off. But anyway, that's another matter.
I think it'd be really hard to accept this report without talking to the people who wrote it for the methodology, because when you pull up the calculator and you go through the information that it provides, it's simply a breakdown of owners and renters. It's a breakdown of who primary household maintainers is kind of how it's done. And it goes from under 25 and then 15 to 25. There's nothing in this entire calculator that's been provided that makes any acknowledgement of the makeup of the households, of children, of teenagers. None of that is accounted for anywhere in this report. It is all just about primary household maintainers, and that's where they're pulling the information from. So I don't think this addresses needs in any real capacity.
Yeah, even though I understand the pressures of different funds we're applying for right now, I would be hesitant to accept this report because of the one main fact that it was created long enough ago that doesn't take into account rental units that have been created. And I feel that that has changed drastically, and also the fact that the new STR policy and the lack of grandfathering in, that has really changed the rental market in town and the housing needs. And I would hate to see pressures within the OCP build due to this report that may influence decisions being made to clear land that in the end we didn't need to clear because we didn't need to build 20 bachelor suites or whatever this report's telling us to build. And just because the OCP relies on reports, and that is what drives the THC, it is what drives our decisions, and it's what drives staffing as well.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Through the chair, I was just trying to look at it, read through this as the discussion was going on. The section on methodology is fairly clear about what it's looking for. And the next section also just talks about considerations. And so this is a report that is based on 2021 census capacity and it's due next month. And I put a lot of this would be for me, the third or fourth one that's been now required. It's just something the province needs that we check that box. So not going to hold the District of Tofino to these numbers. And again, just remembering if you look at the titles, it's considerations and how they're basing it. Like when I read that methodology, it's quite clear about what data they use and why they used it. So I just wanted to say, I don't know if council had an opportunity to read that section, but I think it's quite clear. So I was feeling a little bit of empathy for Mr. Ladder and stuff between having to use 21 census and having something due in January 2025 and seeing these types of reports go through the province. Not having it versus it having what it said, that'd be worse as of January. That's all I'm saying.
The data still doesn't address the makeup of the houses. It doesn't address children or teenagers or families or couples. It's not, there's nothing in any of their data aside from household maintainers.
Yeah, so it does reference HART, so they definitely used HART. Same that the item that you're talking about was one of the data sources they actually used.
Their numbers are the exact same as me just punching in the free thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I fear it's not going to be a great use of time this evening to get into how the report was developed and the content of the report. It's been there for everybody to read. I think the best course of action is to sort of take the risk right now. We are going to go through the holidays in the new year. Staff can have a look and speak with provincial staff and different funding agencies, which we've accessed before and are working with currently through THC, to ask the questions about how this will play out in reality, and to see if any of the content of the report, is able to be looked at again, and how much will be held to held to, stick to the topologies that are in that report. To date, it hasn't been an issue with THC. We've been able to use, to build the 3-bedroom unit that we wanted at Headwaters, Sharp Road too, I believe. So we've had the flexibility there, and I know the provincial landscape with respect to housing has changed. So I think it probably warrants a discussion and a check-in to make sure we won't be necessarily at risk when funding opportunities arise. I don't think we should make any assumptions this evening about how this may play out in reality. I think we should just afford ourselves the time to have a look into it and get back to council with the information in the new year.
Okay, so we just defer it.
Council can either, see if the motion will pass and defeat it, or we can defer the decision to a future council meeting, or no decision is necessary at all. Actually, we can just leave it.
No, I think it's easier not to make any decision at all.
can I make a final comment? I very much appreciate the ability to have this discussion in the committee as a whole, and I very much appreciate staff working on this and working with council's discussion and concerns.
And we do need housing needs assessment reports. We just need to reflect them on the local market. Okay. Unfinished business, none. Any questions?
Thank you, Chair McMaster. I will now make an open call for questions. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. If there is anyone attending online via Zoom that would like to ask a question, you can do so now using the Q&A function. Before asking your question, you will have to state your name, your address, and who you are speaking to. I will now do a call calling once, twice, calling 3 times. Pardon me. No questions, Chair McMaster.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Okay, well, adjourn. Oh, yes.